just because of his skin color. He was kicked out of the first-class lounge, even though he was the one who designed the nation's entire flight coordination system. But instead of arguing, he simply made one call. And within 7 days, the entire airline empire crumbled under the weight of a truth they tried to deny. This is a story that didn't need shouting to shake the world. Just one man, brave enough to stand still at the right moment. It only took 3 seconds, just 3 seconds for a female airline staff member to glance at the color of that man's skin and decide he can't possibly be a first-class passenger. No need to check his ticket. No need to verify his name. Just one passing look, and prejudice did the rest. But what she didn't know was that the man she quietly removed from the lounge wasn't just another traveler. He was Elijah Moore, the very man who had built the operational system of the airport she worked in. A man who had once been denied, deceived, and robbed of credit simply because he wasn't born with privilege. And yet, he rose and built an AI empire that now powers half of America's tech infrastructure. And this time, he didn't yell, he didn't react. He simply pulled out his phone and made one call. Activate Raven Protocol. We don't destroy, we let the truth dismantle those who try to hide it. Today's story isn't just about a man being removed from a first-class seat. It's about an entire system where silence has become a crime and showing up becomes a revolutionary act. The skies over Chicago that day were blanketed with thick gray clouds. The sun couldn't pierce through, but the light was still enough to reflect off the sleek black shell of the Bentley, silently gliding toward the entrance of Sky West International Terminal, a place famously dubbed the hallway of the 1%. Every movement of the car was smooth, as if it barely touched the ground. The driver stepped out, swiftly circling to the back door. A man emerged. Not loud, not flashy, but one look was enough to know. He wasn't ordinary. Elijah Moore, 42 years old. Not a name splashed across magazines like Elon or Bezos, but behind the scenes, he orchestrated the AI networks that quietly powered every major airport in North America. The man who once refused to sell his data systems to the government. The man who flipped games he was never supposed to be part of. The man who built Moore Tech Global out of a room barely the size of someone else's bathroom. And today, Elijah came to Sky West not to flaunt power, but simply to board a routine business flight to San Diego. Just another trip. He wore a silver-gray Tom Ford suit tailored to perfection. No tie, no lapel pin, only a slim platinum watch. A gift he gave himself after closing a $2 billion tech deal 3 years ago. As he stepped through the revolving doors of the main lobby, a cold draft rushed in, not just from the AC, but from the gaze around him. A security guard straightened his spine at the sight of Elijah. A blonde white woman clutched her Chanel bag closer to her chest, as if he had just slipped in through a service entrance. A baggage handler paused mid-text, his eyes flicking over Elijah, then quickly away. Elijah saw it all, but he didn't react, because after decades of living and working in spaces that were never meant for someone like him, those stares had become background music, a kind of white noise, something he'd learned to tune out, not out of submission, but because he had found his own way to respond when the moment was right. He walked toward the first-class check-in counter of Stratosphere Airlines, where only 3 guests stood. 2 female agents behind the counter were whispering. One looked young, with kind eyes. The other, Cheryl Davis, with dyed blonde hair, cold eyes, and a clipped voice, she looked up as Elijah approached. "Good morning," Elijah said, calm and courteous. He placed his membership card and documents on the counter. "Elijah Moore, flight at 11:30 a.m. to San Diego, first class." Cheryl didn't reply right away. She picked up his card like it was something that needed closer inspection. Her fingers tapped the keyboard, not quickly, not slowly, but deliberately, as if waiting for the system to flag something. The younger agent glanced at Cheryl, then at Elijah, and offered a faint, awkward smile. "Traveling for business?" Cheryl asked, her tone more of a probe than a question. "Yes." "Which company?" "Moretech." Elijah's voice remained composed, but firm. "Moretech." Elijah's voice remained composed, but firm. The name made Cheryl blink. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face, but she quickly masked it with suspicion. "This ticket," she paused, looking up, "seems a little unusual. It's quite expensive." Elijah tilted his head. "Unusual in what way?" "We just need to make sure passengers are in the correct class." Her words, though seemingly neutral, were thick with unspoken bias. Right then, an older white man in golf attire nearby piped up, "Coach is over there, my friend." His voice was loud, deliberately so, and Cheryl didn't correct him. On the contrary, she stepped out from behind the counter, walked over to a nearby security officer, and whispered, "Security, we've got an issue. I need verification." Elijah didn't move, didn't argue, didn't demand. He simply watched and waited for the right moment. A few seconds later, he pulled out his phone, unlocked it with a fingerprint, and entered a single command, "Protocol Raven, begin observation mode." Elijah Moore sat silently in the temporary holding lounge, where security had just politely asked him to step aside for document verification. He wasn't angry. He didn't need to be. He simply leaned back slightly in his chair, eyes gazing beyond the frosted glass at the line of airplanes queued up along the runway. Outside was a cloudy Chicago sky. Inside were memories, clear, vivid, as if they had never faded. 28 years ago, South Side Chicago. A thin, dark-skinned 8-year-old boy sat alone on the steps of the Westfield Community Care Center. In his hands wasn't a toy, nor a comic book, just an old-school notebook with frayed corners, filled with numbers and strange diagrams. Elijah, or Eli, as he was then, kept his head down, sketching as if the outside world didn't exist. He didn't ask about lunch, didn't ask when he'd be taken home, because he already knew no one was coming. "Eli," a gentle voice came from beside him. It was Ms. Patterson, the only social worker he trusted. She sat down next to him. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. Your aunt couldn't make it again today." Elijah nodded. No surprise, no anger, no questions. "That's okay. I've got work to do." "What are you writing?" she asked, tilting her head to make sense of the odd symbols sprawling across the page. "It's a system," Eli said seriously. "A system to detect patterns, to know what might happen before it does." "To predict the future?" "No." He shook his head, voice quiet but steady. "To stop disasters before they start." Ms. Patterson gently squeezed the boy's shoulder, her heart aching. This 8-year-old, who had lost both parents in a car accident, had been shuffled through 4 foster homes in 1 year. "I was trying to predict the future, just to survive. No child should have to learn survival skills that early." At 14, Elijah became the only black student at a prestigious all-white suburban high school. Being smart didn't make him popular. It made him invisible, unwelcome. But Elijah didn't seek acceptance. He chose silence. But he never stopped learning. His math teacher, Mr. Benjamin, first noticed Elijah when he submitted a personal paper on university-level financial algorithms. "Where did you learn this?" the teacher asked. "I didn't. I thought of it." Mr. Benjamin was stunned. "What are you building?" "A model to predict financial markets." "For what purpose?" Elijah looked up, and though his face was still young, his eyes carried the weight of someone underestimated far too long. "So I'll never have to beg for opportunities from people who think I don't deserve them." By 17, Elijah was spending sleepless nights finishing his first real project, an AI system that could predict global food shortages based on weather and harvest data. One night, while he was coding on a self-built computer made from second-hand parts in a tiny rented room, the only foster father who had ever treated him kindly, Jim, walked in. 3 in the morning, Eli. Why aren't you sleeping? Elijah didn't take his eyes off the screen. Deadline for the MIT scholarship submission? Jim fell silent for a moment. This app? What's it for? It helps aid organizations see where hunger is coming before it arrives. The middle-aged man just shook his head. What kind of kid thinks of things like that at 17? Elijah didn't answer, but for the first time in years, a smile began to form on his lips. Back to the present. Elijah still sat quietly in the Sky West security lounge. Those memories didn't weaken him. They reminded him of who he was, where he came from, and why couldn't he stay silent again? His phone buzzed lightly in his pocket. Elijah unlocked the screen. A single message from Mortec's internal system appeared. Observation active, Phase 1 initiated. He looked up. His expression was calm. But behind those eyes, a silent storm was beginning to rise. While Elijah Moore sat silently in Sky West's security room outside, the airport continued operating like any other day. Flight announcements echoed overhead. Signs blinked non-stop. Flight schedules flickered across monitors, changing by the second. But something was different. Someone knew something was wrong, and that someone wasn't staying silent. On the 3rd floor, inside the employee break room, Deshaun Ellis, a newly onboarded intern at Stratosphere Airlines, was staring intently at his phone screen. He had seen everything. The moment Elijah Moore was stopped, the way Cheryl Davis summoned security, not outright, but with unmistakable intent. And more than anything, the look in that man's eyes as he was led away. Deshaun wasn't naive. He studied information technology at Howard University, wrote his senior thesis using a deep learning AI model developed by Mortec Global. To him, Elijah Moore was a symbol, the reason he pursued this field in the first place. And now, his idol was being treated like a fraud by the very system he had helped build. His phone buzzed. A message from a friend in the IT department. I just checked the cameras. People in ops are whispering. Looks like someone's tampered with the system from the outside. Deshaun replied, Not from the outside, from the inside. It's Elijah Moore, and we've got a serious problem. Elsewhere in the terminal, technicians began noticing anomalies. Credit card transactions at self-check-in kiosks were being repeatedly declined. First-class passengers received odd messages, saying they'd been moved to economy. Flight schedules on the mobile app vanished and reappeared randomly. Or so it seemed. At first, it looked like a system glitch, but those who knew better understood. No system randomly fails in such an organized way. Meanwhile, Cheryl Davis, the one who ordered Elijah removed from the first-class area, was briskly walking down the corridor, a flicker of unease in her eyes. She had worked here for 12 years and had never seen anything like this. No one shouted, no one pulled out a phone at the time, but something cold, invisible, and unstoppable was coming. She entered the staff room where Maya Jensen, a younger colleague, was reviewing the internal security footage. What's going on? Cheryl asked. Maya didn't look up. Do you know who that man is? Cheryl frowned. Some show-off. Thinks he's VIP just by how he dresses? No. Maya turned to her, voice calm but cutting. That's Elijah Moore, the man who built the coordination system that this entire airport runs on. Cheryl blinked, but her expression quickly shifted to defense mode. That doesn't matter. I followed protocol. Protocol? Maya raised an eyebrow. And you think protocol gives you the right to remove someone from first-class check-in just because he doesn't look like he belongs there? Cheryl froze. No answer. Because the truth was, she knew. She had always known. And this time, she picked the wrong man. Across the tarmac, on the top floor of a private glass-walled office facing the airport, a woman with short-cropped hair and X-ray eyes monitored every movement. Riley Anika, Global Security Director at Moretech Global, was now in a position. She placed her earpiece on and spoke into the mic. Raven is active. Switch to soft response mode. Begin collecting all internal Stratosphere Airlines data from the last 24 hours. A voice responded, confirmed. All servers are under surveillance. Primary target, Cheryl Davis. Potential bias and abuse of authority. Secondary, CEO William Braddock. Trace financial and political affiliations. Riley leaned back in her chair. She knew. The weakness in this system wasn't technical. It was the belief that someone like Elijah Moore would stay silent forever. 9:42 a.m. 17th floor. Headquarters of Stratosphere Airlines in Atlanta. William Braddock, a seasoned CEO with 30 years in the aviation industry, stood before the tall glass wall, a glass of whiskey gently swirling in his hand, eyes gazing down at the traffic below. He had no idea his entire office was quietly sinking into a crisis, one spreading from within, like an invisible crack in reinforced glass. Bad news from Sky West, the PR assistant panted as she stepped in. Braddock raised an eyebrow. What now? Flight delays? It's Elijah Moore. The whiskey froze mid-swish in his hand. Elijah Moore? Moretech. Yes, he was denied entry into the first-class lounge this morning. There's a video. It's starting to go viral. Braddock chuckled. A rich black man getting hassled at an airport. Oh, please. That happens every day. People forget by tomorrow. But this is Elijah Moore, the man running the entire federal flight scheduling infrastructure. Braddock waved her off. Blame the staff. Draft a vague apology. We stick to our don't overreact strategy. The crowd forgets fast. But this time, no one forgot. In Stratosphere's tech department, small glitches began stacking up. First-class passengers were suddenly reassigned to economy with no explanation. Flight schedules displayed incorrect time zones, causing hundreds to miss their connections. Payment terminals malfunctioned, double-charging transactions, then denying refunds. The head of engineering frowned, his face turning red. Are we under attack? A junior engineer at the back of the room shook his head. No signs of external intrusion. Then what is it? The engineer's voice dropped. It's the system reacting to itself, like someone knows exactly where the blind spots are, and is pressing them one by one. At that very moment, in the customer experience division, a short clip began circulating across the internal network, footage showing Cheryl Davis directly rejecting Elijah Moore despite his presenting valid documentation. The clip was only 42 seconds long, but it was damning. Braddock chuckled. A rich black man getting hassled at an airport. Oh, please, that happens every day. People forget by tomorrow. But this is Elijah Moore, the man running the entire federal flight scheduling infrastructure. Braddock waved her off. Blame the staff. Draft a vague apology. We stick to our don't overreact strategy. The crowd forgets fast. But this time, no one forgot. In Stratosphere's tech department, small glitches began stacking up. First-class passengers were suddenly reassigned to economy with no explanation. Flight schedules displayed incorrect time zones, causing hundreds to miss their connections. Payment terminals malfunctioned, double-charging transactions, then denying refunds. The head of engineering frowned, his face turning red. Are we under attack? A junior engineer at the back of the room shook his head. No signs of external intrusion. Then what is it? The engineer's voice dropped. It's the system reacting to itself, like someone knows exactly where the blind spots are and is pressing them one by one. At that very moment, in the Customer Experience Division, a short clip began circulating across the internal network, footage showing Cheryl Davis directly rejecting Elijah Moore, despite his presenting valid documentation. The clip was only 42 seconds long, but it was damning. 10:35 a.m. 23rd floor, Strategic Operations Center, Moore Global, Chicago. The glow from LED screens reflected off Riley Annika's face as she stood at the center of the room, like a conductor in a symphony of data. No one spoke. No one was allowed to speculate. Here, everything must come from data. Campaign status? She asked. A technician reported, Phase 1 complete. All system anomalies at Stratosphere Airlines within the last 72 hours have been logged. Over 14,000 customer transactions affected. Initiate Phase 2. Copy. Activating internal behavior analysis, extracting communication streams from key employee accounts. Riley glanced at the large map displayed on the central monitor, a matrix of red markers glowing across Stratosphere's internal landscape. From accounting, engineering, and flight attendants to internal communications. Now, Riley said, her voice low and steady, find out who enabled this. Who knew and chose silence. Meanwhile, in the basement of Stratosphere Airlines' IT tower in Dallas, an emergency meeting was underway. The head of engineering slammed his hand on the table. These errors aren't random. They're following a pattern. Like, the system's core is turning on itself. A young female engineer stood up, her face pale. I think I know what's happening. The room fell silent. 3 years ago, Stratosphere signed a contract with Moore to integrate scheduling, data control, and passenger coordination systems. Yeah. So? That system's core was written by Elijah Moore himself. And I suspect, she hesitated, he may have embedded a back door. Only he knows how to access. The air stiffened. You're saying he can control the entire system remotely? Not control, she said quietly. Observe, analyze, respond, only when necessary, and it looks like that time is now. At SkyWest Terminal, Deshaun Ellis, the intern who had witnessed everything, quietly scrolled through his phone. A new message arrived from a friend in internal IT. Internal alert just triggered. All staff devices are under review. Anyone accessing security camera footage will be flagged. You too, Deshaun. He swallowed hard. There was no turning back. Deshaun looked around. To everyone else, it was just another day. But he felt it. He was in the middle of a battlefield no one could see. He typed a message and hit send. To info@mooretechglobal.com. Subject, I'm ready to cooperate. I have the data, and I have a reason I can't stay silent anymore. In Chicago, Elijah Moore still hadn't spoken publicly. No press appearance, no statements. But within Moore internal system, he was reviewing hundreds of documents newly downloaded from authorized databases. They included internal emails from Stratosphere leadership titled, Protect Brand Image, Avoid Conflict with Black Media. A 2022 security report. Profile of potential high-risk passengers. Special attention to black males in premium cabins. A private audio recording of Braddock saying, as long as it doesn't hit CNN, anything can be contained. Elijah placed his hand on the mouse. He opened each file, read slowly, expressionless. Then he said quietly, send everything to Riley. It's time the system got audited by a justice it was never programmed to recognize. 11:08 a.m. On the Moore internal bulletin, a single line appeared. white text on a black screen. The first step toward transparency is pausing to look at what we've long ignored. Immediately after, the company's internal data system began uploading a series of flagged documents. Discriminatory Access Log, 2021 to 2024, internal complaint records, ignored, PR response templates, manipulating public sentiment, HR suppression directives, Cheryl Davis, 12 documented cases, all files were encrypted, but just visible enough for those involved to realize the truth was no longer buried. In New York, the CNN morning program abruptly cut away from a financial segment. We've just received a rapidly spreading video showing entrepreneur Elijah Moore, CEO of Moretech, being denied access to the first-class lounge of Stratosphere Airlines, despite holding all valid documents and a business-class ticket. The screen shifted to surveillance footage of Cheryl Davis, her condescending stare. Her hand was flipping the boarding pass as if it were forged. The anchor paused, then stared into the camera. Is it possible that the very man who helped build the nation's aviation systems was treated like a criminal because of the color of his skin? Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, Instagram. They exploded. The hashtag #FlyWhileBlack trended within 30 minutes. Then came R Strato Shame after an anonymous employee leaked an internal email titled, "Black passengers in first class require extra verification." At SkyWest Airport, passengers began to notice. People looked around, whispering. A middle-aged black woman nodded as she spotted Elijah Moore's photo on a nearby student's phone. "I know him," she said softly. "He's the reason my daughter got a scholarship in tech." And in the employee room, Cheryl Davis sat trembling in the corner. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from friends, colleagues, and even the local press. One message stood out. "Your file just leaked. There's audio from an internal meeting. They're going to pin it all on you." She burst into tears. Not out of guilt, but because she now knew no one would protect her this time. Braddock entered an emergency meeting with top executives. Everyone stood in a tense circle. No one spoke. On the screen, headlines flashed. Stratosphere Airlines faces allegations of systemic discrimination. The man who built the U.S. aviation network ejected by his system. Elijah Moore's silent counterattack, a data revolution begins. Braddock slammed his hand on the table. "Shut it all down. This is media noise. 1 day, 2 days, it'll pass." But no one nodded, because this time, the storm wasn't coming from the media. It was coming from the very heart of the system, and the system was turning against him. In Chicago, Elijah Moore still hadn't appeared on the news. No statements, no interviews. He walked quietly through the chilly March streets, back in the old neighborhood where he grew up. A young black boy pedaled past on a bike. He slowed, then stopped, eyes wide. "Are you the guy who got kicked out of first class?" Elijah smiled. "Maybe I am. But now everyone knows you're a tech boss. They were wrong, weren't they?" Elijah looked at him, his gaze calm, but warm. "Yes, but more importantly, they won't dare be wrong like that again." 2:14 p.m., Operations Room, 20th floor, Stratosphere Airlines Headquarters, Atlanta. William Braddock, still the CEO on paper, entered the room where the entire executive board was waiting. No greetings, no smiles, only cold stares. And a massive screen already displaying a Moretech presentation. Line by line, the data appeared. Silently. No need for commentary. 17 internal complaints about racially biased passenger screening policies. All filed under the folder, "Low priority, do not action." 14 emails from senior executives instructing staff to double-check black passengers in VIP zones. citing brand protection. 4 shady transactions from the internal PR fund to an outlet that deleted a negative report about Elijah Moore last year. Then the screen froze on a single frame. Elijah is being escorted out of the lounge, his eyes locked on the security camera. No hatred, no resistance. But in those eyes, a storm, waiting for the right moment to strike. Braddock slammed the table. "Enough! This is blackmail, media manipulation." But no one looked at him anymore. Everyone turned toward a second screen, where a new face had just appeared. Helen Voss, Chief Operating Officer, the only executive who had spoken out. 2 years ago, against the racially biased screening policy. "William," Helen said, her voice icy calm, I've just received notification. The board is initiating a no-confidence vote, and the FBI has requested access to financial records from the past 3 years." Braddock choked. "You're betraying me?" "No," Helen replied. "I'm standing with the truth, the one you should have defended from the start." Meanwhile, in another conference room, Deshaun Ellis, the intern who witnessed it all, sat across from a team of MoreTech lawyers and advisors. On the table, an official offer letter and legal protection documents. Not because he was involved, but because he chose to act when no one else dared to. "You can say no," a female lawyer said, "but if you say yes, you'll help rebuild a system where no one is treated like a stranger in the very airport they helped operate." Deshaun nodded. His eyes welled up, not from fear, but because, for the first time, his courage was being seen and valued. In Washington, Stratosphere's lobbying team scrambled to contain the damage. "We need a public apology, compensation, and a new face for the media," the PR head suggested. Braddock shook his head. His eyes were wild, like a cornered animal. "We don't apologize. We fight." "Fight who?" someone whispered. "Moore." "And when you lose?" "We don't lose." His voice trembled. In Chicago, Elijah received a call from Riley Annika. Her tone was firm. "Phase 2 is complete. All financial data, behavioral patterns, and discriminatory policies have been forwarded to the SEC and DOJ and Helen Voss. She's stepping forward. She'll represent the new leadership once the vote is finalized." Elijah nodded. "Then it's time." "Time for what?" Riley asked. Elijah looked out the window. The sky was painted in shades of dusk. "Time for them to remove their masks before we have to rip them off." We don't apologize. We fight." "Fight who?" someone whispered. "Moore." "And when you lose?" "We don't lose." His voice trembled. In Chicago, Elijah received a call from Riley Annika. Her tone was firm. "Phase 2 is complete. All financial data, behavioral patterns, and discriminatory policies have been forwarded to the SEC and DOJ and Helen Voss. She's stepping forward. She'll represent the new leadership once the vote is finalized." Elijah nodded. "Then it's time." "Time for what?" Riley asked. Elijah looked out the window. The sky was painted in shades of dusk. "Time for them to remove their masks before we have to rip them off." At SkyWest Airport, a quiet protest had begun. No chants, no shouting, just hundreds of passengers, elderly, young, black, Asian, Latinx, all wearing black T-shirts with white lettering. "I don't need a first-class ticket to be treated with respect." Journalists swarmed in, cameras rolled, police arrived, but no one broke the law. They stood still. They stayed silent, but they could no longer be ignored. In his private office, Elijah Moore monitored everything via Moortech's secure feeds. Riley Anika stepped in, placing a file on his desk. "It's done. They've admitted everything. Braddock is about to face a no-confidence vote. The SEC has launched an official investigation. The FBI is freezing his accounts. And most importantly," she tapped the screen, displaying Stratosphere's internal board vote tally. 10 in favor, 1 opposed, 1 abstention. Braddock removed. Helen Voss appointed as interim CEO. Elijah simply said, "Any system that wants to survive must learn to fix itself before it's replaced." And then, Moortech released its next official statement across all platforms. "We are working with Helen Voss and the new leadership team to establish a reform alliance for Stratosphere Airlines, building toward an aviation ecosystem that is transparent, equitable, and truly serves every citizen." Under the announcement, a flood of comments poured in. "This is why I still believe in tech. Elijah Moore isn't just a genius, he's a reckoning. Thank you for not staying silent like so many others. They owe you an apology. We owe you our support." Would you like me to now craft a closing outro epilogue for the entire story with a powerful reflection and community call to action? It will wrap the story with emotional resonance and thematic impact, perfect for a video conclusion or message to the audience. 9:15 a.m. Federal Hearing Center, Washington, D.C. Special Session, broadcast live nationwide. Elijah Moore entered the chamber wearing a classic black suit, his face calm, his gaze steady and grounded. Across the table sat William Braddock, now the former CEO. His eyes sunken, hair visibly grayer after what had been the worst week of his career, and perhaps his life. Cameras from CNN, BBC, and dozens of international media outlets were trained on this moment. The chair of the hearing nodded. "Mr. Elijah Moore, you may proceed." Elijah stood. No notes, no slides, just himself, and a truth too undeniable to ignore. "I'm not here today as a victim. I'm not here to recite grievances. I'm here to remind us all. That is when a system treats human beings as invisible. The worst part isn't the insult, it's the fact that society has grown comfortable with it." He turned toward Braddock, his gaze no longer angry, only clear. "I was denied a seat in first class because someone didn't believe a man like me could possibly afford it. But the issue was never just a seat. It was about who gets to decide. Who deserves respect?" Braddock opened his mouth, perhaps to object, but no one gave him the floor. Elijah continued. His voice was still calm, but sharp as a blade. "I could have sued. I could have burned it all down. But I chose transparency. I chose light. Because if we only replace the figurehead without changing the system, the cycle repeats. And then another Elijah, another little girl, another passenger will be pushed aside again, and no one will look back." When his speech ended, the entire room rose to their feet. No signal, no prompt. Not because Elijah demanded power, but because he embodied a truth everyone had felt, endured, but never knew how to turn it into action. At that very moment on national television, the CNN anchor choked up while reading the breaking news. Moortech has officially acquired 65% of Stratosphere Airlines and announced the rebranding of the airline under a new name. Coal Air, short for Code of Leadership and Equality. The new slogan, "Every passenger is a human being, no more, no less." At the newly restructured headquarters, Helen Voss, now interim CEO, officially appointed Elijah Moore as Global Strategic Advisor. "We cannot change the past," Helen said, "but we can make sure it never repeats itself." At a private press conference, Elijah was asked, "Have you forgiven William Braddock?" He looked directly into the camera and replied, "I don't need to forgive or punish. What matters is that the system he built never again gets the chance to destroy people like me." 6:05 p.m., Southside Chicago. It was lightly drizzling. Elijah Moore stepped out of a black SUV. No press convoy, no security detail, no cameras, just him, and the old red brick house where he once lived during the first years after losing both of his parents. In his hand was a worn-out school backpack, the same kind he used to carry as a child. No documents, no laptop, only a single item inside, his very first notebook, filled with scribbled code, once imagined by a child dreaming of a system that could predict the future, not for profit, but to protect people like him from being hurt. Inside Greenfield Elementary School, Elijah's old school, the lights were unusually bright that evening. All students from 3rd to 8th grade were gathered in the auditorium, seated neatly. A banner above the stage read, "Welcome back, Elijah Moore, who once sat in these very seats." Elijah walked up to the podium. No slides, no script, just his eyes, quiet, steady, and full of trust. "When I was your age, I used to think, if I work harder, if I'm smarter, maybe, just maybe, the world will stop judging me by my skin. But as I grew up, I learned justice doesn't come because you're good enough. It only comes when enough good people stop staying silent." He looked down toward the front row, where a young black girl sat, her braids neat, arms wrapped around a crumpled notebook. "I'm not here because I beat an airline. I'm here because I don't want you to grow up in a world where proving your worth is a requirement, just because you're different." He paused. The entire room fell silent. "I can't promise we'll change everything, but I can promise this. I won't leave until we have enough people willing to change it together." After the speech, the principal invited Elijah to cut the ribbon of the Elijah Moore Foundation Tech Center, a brand new learning space funded by him where children of color in the community would have free access to computers, AI tools, and global mentors. At the center's entrance, a metal plaque read, "For those who were once ignored. This is where you will be heard." Final scene. Elijah sat alone on the same steps of the old care home, the place where, long ago, he was left with nothing but a notebook and a dream. Night had fallen. He looked up at the stars shimmering above. A student passed by, recognized him, and called out quietly, "Mr. Moore." Elijah turned and smiled. I want to learn, I like you did." Elijah nodded, saying nothing, just patted the step beside him. "Come sit. Tell me why." This isn't just Elijah Moore's story. It's not just about being denied entry to a first-class lounge. It's not just about an airline stripped bare beneath the glow of PR lights. This is the story of every person who's ever been overlooked, simply because they didn't look important enough. It's the story of those who once stayed silent out of fear, but eventually chose to step into the light, because silence was no longer an option. And what about you? Have you ever been misjudged because of the way you dressed, the way you spoke, or the color you carried on your skin? Share your story in the comments, because maybe your voice will be the spark that gives someone else the courage to rise from where they've been hurt. And if you believe that justice isn't a privilege, but a basic right we all deserve, then hit like, share, and subscribe to this channel, so you won't miss more real stories that shake hearts and shift systems. Because sometimes, a single silent phone call is all it takes to bring down an empire.